Hey folks, good morning and welcome back to Southwest Victory Gardens. My name is Brandon and on this channel we talk all about backyard gardening in desert climates. So thanks for checking out this video. I really appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and continue our series on drip irrigation. In our previous video, which I put a link to down in the description below, we talked about the basic components of a drip irrigation system. So if you're interested in installing a drip irrigation system for your garden or for your landscape and you don't really know where to start, I recommend checking out that video, because what we do is break down all of the individual components of an irrigation system so that you can go out and search and find the one that fits your situation best. So if you're doing a simple, vegetable garden and that's all you need, you have a lot of options versus, if you're doing a landscape with lots of trees and cactus and succulents and different types of plants that you want to water. So check out that video and learn all about the basic components of the system. And in this video, what we're going to talk about is how, once you got those components together, your options that you're going to actually have now that you're sort of thinking about how you want to design your irrigation system. So regardless if you're going with the hose timer setup, we have our backflow preventer, our filter, our pressure regulator, or you're going with something more like an in-ground system where you have an underground valve that connects to your filter and pressure regulator. Once you decide on what kind of system you're going to go with, you're eventually going to need to start connecting it to some kind of tubing. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video, is the different types of tubing and emitters that you're going to run into when you're starting to look for your drip irrigation components. Okay, so you could go to Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever and buy, a basic kit, something like this, that includes all of the tubing. It includes some basic emitters. It includes some of the spaghetti tubing. It even has a backflow preventer and a pressure regulator and some of the things we talked about in that last video. I'm going to recommend that you not do that. It's very convenient in some respects, to have all of those materials in one box. But you're going to run into some issues with these components. They tend to be a lot lower quality, and while it may seem great to have a bunch of different things in this kit, what you might find is that you end up not using a lot of them. So it's like when you buy a screwdriver set and you get all these different little bits, and half the time you're just using Phillips anyway. So what I instead is going to walk you through the basic components. And you can buy all of them individually, one by one. You can buy just one little emitter if that's all you want here at our local irrigation supply stores. So instead of having to buy a bunch of things you may not need that are of low quality, instead, I'm going to recommend we go ahead and just source all of the materials individually as you need them, and then that's going to save you some money, and you're going to have a little bit better quality products. So, it's kind of a win-win, right? Okay, so, you have your basic setup. Let's say you're going to go with the hose and timer, and now you have the option to connect to a poly tubing or a black irrigation tubing, okay? So you're going to basically have a few options when it comes to your black tubing. So your main type of tubing that you're going to see in 95% of landscapes is what we call black poly tube. So when I refer to poly tube, I'm referring specifically to this 1/2-inch black polyethylene irrigation tube. This is going to be your main water supply line from your irrigation controller and plumbing through your landscape. So this is somewhat flexible. It's rigid, but it's pretty flexible, and it has a 1/2-inch diameter. Now, if you have a large community garden or you're watering, a lot of acreage, you might actually use a 3/4 inch or even a 1-inch black tubing. But for most applications for gardening and backyard landscaping, 1/2-inch tubing, 1/2-inch poly tube is going to be the main tube that we use, okay? Now, the second most important tubing that we're going to want to familiarize ourselves with is the 1/4 inch poly tube, also known as spaghetti tubing. So anytime I refer to poly tube, I'm going to definitely be probably referring to, I am most likely going to be referring to the 1/2-inch poly, okay? So if I say poly, I'm talking about this tubing right here, the 1/2-inch. When I say spaghetti tubing, I'm referring specifically to the 1/4 inch poly tubing that is the 1/4 inch diameter. So it's like a spaghetti noodle, right? So we call this, it's commonly referred to as spaghetti tubing. I think the technical term might be micro tubing, but regardless, we have a 1/4 inch tubing and a 1/2 inch tubing. So the 1/2 inch tube is going to run all through our landscape, and it's going to be the main supply line for our water. And our 1/4 inch tubing is going to attach to our 1/2 inch tubing through connectors, and then this is what we're going to supply to our individual plants. All right, so we're going to use this line to supply our water pressure through our landscape, and then we're going to run off of this main line with our 1/4 inch spaghetti tubing to our individual plants using different types of emitters. All right, so when it comes to poly tubing, you know, depending on where we're gonna, you know, run our lines in our landscape, or if we ever have a break in our line or a puncture, we're gonna need to somehow splice the lines together. And to do that, there are two basic types of connectors that you can use in your poly tubing. So the first is what is called a compression fitting, okay? So a compression connector, you can see it's got the blue on the ends. So you have the black fitting with the blue tips on the ends. These are what are known as compression fittings. And you can see that this is a female opening. And what you do is to connect the tubing is you force through a lot of pressure the 1/2 inch tubing into the compression fitting, and then through just sheer compression, it creates a watertight seal. So you can have, you know, T's, you can have elbows, and you know, you can have just straight connectors, and regardless, it's brute force. Now some people will say dip this in hot water or light it on fire and you could, you know, squeeze it in easier. I don't carry around hot water with me when I'm out on the job site, so it's not really practical for me to do that. So oftentimes I end up just sort of wiggling it in and pushing it in there. And so because of that, I'm not a big fan of these particular fittings. These are very difficult to work with, and once you put the tubing in the compression fitting, it's there forever. It's never coming out, and if you make a mistake, you have to cut the line and redo it, okay? So compression fittings. Now your other option is the power lock fitting. So a power lock fitting, instead of having a female opening like our compression fittings, power locks have a male fitting that fit inside of the tubing, like so. And then you simply tighten the fitting around the tubing, and then now this creates a secure watertight seal. So unlike the compression fitting, the power lock fitting fits inside of the tubing, whereas on the compression fitting, the tubing fits inside of the compression fitting. The beauty of power lock fittings is, let's say you make a mistake and you're measuring, you can take it out and you can reuse it, all right? So power lock fittings, a lot easier to work with than compression fittings. These both do the same thing. These both will connect, you know, a 1/2 inch poly, except this one, it's cheaper, but you can't reuse it. This one's more expensive, it's easier to work with, and you can reuse it. So, you know, if you're gonna be using 1/2 inch poly, I'm gonna recommend the power lock fittings, okay? Now, that's what we need if we're gonna be working with 1/2 inch poly. When it comes to spaghetti tubing, which is again our 1/4 inch tubing, we have the same type of connectors, except now they're very tiny. They're tiny little connectors, and we'll zoom in on these so you can get a good look at them. But you can do the same kind of splicing with these connectors. You know, you can connect them, and these basically are male end connectors, and once they're in the barbs, you can't take them out. They're in forever, right? And so we can then use these types of fittings to connect to our main poly line, or to splice individual sections of 1/4 inch tubing. So let me show you a little bit about how, you know, we might set up a basic you know, run of irrigation line, and how you might, you know, install an emitter to that line, and just show you the very, very basics. All right, so before we move on to the next video where I'm gonna show you some different methods for how to connect these emitters to our poly tube, real quick, just to reiterate, This is 1/2 inch black poly. This is our main water supply line. We connect that to our timer with either a compression or power lock fitting that you see here. Now, if you can imagine this 1/2 inch black poly, this water supply line going from your timer or your irrigation box underground to your garden or to different parts of your property, this is going to be your main water supply line. And to this line, we're going to connect 1/4 inch micro tubing or spaghetti tubing, which is that roll you see there. Now, in the next video, what I want to do is show you a couple different methods how we can hook up these emitters, some right, some wrong, but I'm going to show you just different ways that we can do that. I'm also going to show you some methods for repairing leaks and how to connect 1/4 inch spaghetti tubing using 1/4 inch barbs. So thanks for checking out this video, guys. Really appreciate it. See you next time. Bye.